Good evening and welcome to another episode of aPolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is Kian Jabour and as usual, I am your host this evening. We are 1 week away from Christmas, so I know a lot has been going on and I know, I'm going to be very honest with you, I know this is not particularly the most political time in our country. And again, just time of the year. It's not what a lot of people want to deal with, but unfortunately, we have such a large national issue that is afoot that I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to bring the best person on I possibly can. Somebody whose opinion I think everybody in this country respects, and definitely someone who is well more versed in treaties and agreements than the rest of us. Nonetheless, Mr. Timothy Jonas, thank you for being here again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Kian. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Pleasure having you. But nonetheless, what we are going to be discussing today is the Venezuela controversy. There has been a lot of developments as of last night in which President Irfan Ali and President Maduro met in St. Vincent, and I guess an agreement to an extent has been reached, and they have both met on a few topics, but I think those topics need to be discussed a little bit now, and some maybe particularly the points within those topics. So let's jump straight into it, because I do have another topic which I think even probably the largest sector of the country is even equally concerned about, which is their economic situation. This being the 6.5% increase in public servants. There's more public servants than any other sector in the country, whether in the private sector, and this obviously being the public sector. So the government being the largest employer in the country. The economic situation for our public servants has a very large impact on all of our lives, believe it or not, whether it be private sector, whether it be, the families at home, school children. This is such a large aspect of our economy that it must be discussed, and what is benefiting them or what they are having issues with needs to be discussed equally. But before that, we're going to discuss Venezuela a little bit. All right. Just to update everyone, as I mentioned briefly, yesterday, for the entire day, the president of Guyana and the president of Venezuela met. I think for the first time in quite some time, and definitely the first time since this controversy has erupted within the last few months. They met, and let's make this very clear. They met on the request of the CELAC organization, which is South American heads, the Brazilian president, and the CARICOM heads. They're the ones that facilitated these meetings. They're the ones that have requested it. And naturally so, as our counterparts, as other countries in the region, they will be affected if there is an issue. So how they viewed it, I guess in this case, is we need to ensure that peace prevails, no matter what your conflict or issue is. And because of that, we believe that dialogue needs to occur. So they facilitated this meeting. This is how it was presented. The president himself, I think, released in his many press statements during, within the last couple days before the meeting, he said, he understood that maybe a meeting might not be the best route at this point in time, but because of our counterparts, because of our allies and the people that we lean on, the people that we look at for support are requesting it, he felt that, you know what, I think it's best that we agree and see what can come out of it. So I think what is most important to me here is I have to be the first to admit, and I know that lots of the country agree with me, the president was in a rock and a hard place, and I think he did as well as he could have given the circumstances. I have to give him respect for that. It is, I don't think any of us will ever envy that position in particular. But nonetheless, he handled it as a statesman. He came out of it, I think, with maybe as strong a position as possible, given the circumstances. But I think that's what the topic of discussion is here now. Now that we have this, it's called the Treaty of Argyll, I believe, the Declaration of Argyll. And you, I assume, had a chance to read the points of it. In their brief. It's not a very long document. And go ahead, please tell me what your position is on this whole scenario.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I'm not sure that the South American organization was at the helm, I think that the initiative emanating from Ralph Gonzalez was as a result of the CARICOM statement saying that the parties needed to keep discourse open. So there's no doubt about that. And let's be clear, I've seen so many of the keyboard experts, the Facebook experts, saying we should send the Venezuelan ambassador home and that kind of thing. No. In international relations, if you can't talk, there's nothing else to do except fight. And therefore, you keep diplomatic channels open, you keep avenues of communication open at all costs. So that needed to be done, and what that means is you keep talking. Now, here is where it gets a bit rocky for me. It gets a bit bumpy. You see, I do not have great confidence in the level of competence of our leaders, and that is why it was an issue for me. We are in the ICJ in a process that started 50 years ago with the Geneva Agreement, and pursuing the terms of the Geneva Agreement have found ourselves in the ICJ. And the International Court of Justice have arrogated to themselves jurisdiction because that agreement set out the methodology for resolving the dispute which existed, and the methodology included the Secretary General of the United Nations deciding the forum where the dispute should go to if he could not resolve it through mediation using his good offices, which he could not. So that's why we're there. And for that reason, the International Court of Justice, in what to me is not a difficult issue, easily decided it had the jurisdiction because both parties had consented, and because in terms of the history and the law we are strong, we need to make sure the focus remains in the International Court of Justice. My fear is that any deviation from that opens the door for Maduro to say to his followers, we have been victorious in asserting that, which Venezuela have always asserted, that the Geneva Agreement requires bilateral discussions, and we are going back to bilateral discussions, and here we've met. So with that fear in mind, when I was considering the history, and that fear raised its head, I was mightily relieved to see the unequivocal statement from our leaders that they are happy to talk. They had to talk, I agree, they did the right thing. They agreed to go to St. Vincent and talk. But they are not talking about the dispute. They are talking about other ancillary good neighbor relations, because Venezuela is still our neighbor. I thought that was important. So they are talking about peaceful coexistence, they're talking about mutual cooperation, they're talking about everything except the Essequibo dispute. And that needed to be said. So that's where we went, and that's what they did. But here's the thing that bothers me now. If any mistake is made, if any reference is made back to the Essequibo dispute, or a discussion between the parties, or bilateral talks, which Venezuela have been arguing for all the time, it opens the door for the Venezuelans in Venezuela to use their propaganda machine and to make a mountain out of it, and to try to pretend that there was some kind of concession. Now, for the most part, and let's be clear, when two leaders of two countries go and sit down and look at each other across the table, the conversation has already taken place behind the scenes. The agreement has already been documented by the people who are experts, or at least this is how it should be, who are experts in the various foreign affairs ministries, who have already had the discussions and have agreed on modalities and have agreed on general terms of agreement already. So don't be fooled. Those two gentlemen didn't go and sit down and hammer out something between themselves. Something had already been agreed. The terms were already there. They were there for the photo op. Whoever hammered out these terms, for the most part, got it right. There is one reservation I have, which is in clause 9 of the memorandum. Now, in clause 9, forgive me, I don't want to misrepresent what it says, so I'm going to read it. Both states agree to meet again in Brazil within the next 3 months or at another agreed time to consider any matter with implications for the territory in dispute, including the above-mentioned update on the Joint Commission. Now, this is careless language, and there's no doubt when you look at the overall tenor of this document and the overall structure that we did not give an inch and Venezuela did not give an inch in terms of concessions. But it is easy to see that Venezuela will try to make a great deal out of this, to say that Venezuela now is intending to meet with us to discuss matters with implications for Essequibo. I have a problem with that. I don't propose that Guyana needs to meet with anybody to discuss any matter that has implications for Essequibo. If Essequibo is part of our territory and we have sovereign right over Essequibo, we don't have a need to discuss it with anybody. This goes back to competence. Now, let me tell you, when you got PNC, PPP tit for tat, and you have the people in the one ethnic group quarreling with the people in the other ethnic group and talking about lesser of two evils, and we're better than them, and we're not as bad as them, and they're corrupt, and we rig, and all those kinds of things, that's a comfort zone for us Guyanese. We've been doing that for so long that we could parrot that crap that we've been talking about for 60 years. But when we got serious issues, we need to step back from that. And you know what? We have been indulging in that for so long that we've lost sight of what's important. The need for competence, the need for a level of education, the need to have professionals around you. And I worry if Guyana has the competence within the leadership that we're seeing to carry out what needs to be carried out at this stage. I hope that when Venezuela starts making a mountain out of whatever concessions they imagine from this, that we have a quick and prompt rebuttal, a quick and prompt answer to point out that the entire thrust of this document shows that neither side is conceding anything and shows that neither side is agreeing to give an inch, but that both sides agree, and this is what's critical, both sides agree that there must be peaceful coexistence between them as neighbors to maintain the peace that exists in this hemisphere. And that is what needed to be talked about. Nothing else.
All right. I'm going to converse a little bit about another aspect that I want your opinion on and its implications. This agreement also states that Guyana has declared that it will abide by the ICJ's ruling and that it holds the ICJ as the authority to determine this matter. In that clause, as a matter of fact, can I borrow, because I saw you have the clause here and my phone is being utilized, but I'll read the exact clause just because I think it's important to say word for word. In clause 4, right? Noted Guyana's assertion that it is committed to the process and procedures of the International Court of Justice for the resolution of the border controversy. Noted Venezuela's assertion of its lack of consent and lack of resignation of the International Court of Justice's jurisdiction in the border controversy. This is as clear language as possible, in which Guyana has said we're following ICJ's decision and Venezuela stating they don't care about it. Now, as a, again, non-learned citizen here, do I have anything to be concerned about with that language being used and asserted here in this document?
I read it twice.
Okay.
And so just like you, I looked at it, I was a bit taken aback, I read it again. But here's the thing. I note your position. I don't concede your position. I don't dignify it. It's noted. And Venezuela equally noted our position that we adhere to the International Court of Justice. So when I read it again, I could live with it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how scrupulously I went through this thing because of my lack of confidence.
Right. Good.
In the capacity of our leaders to deal with this. But for the most part, I was satisfied. Those points where we note your position and you note our position, I can live with it. I'm a bit worried about what the propaganda machine in Venezuela can make. Now, here's what was so important about this entire thing. It dropped the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So, Guyanese, people are so fickle. A few days ago, there was the tragic helicopter crash, and Guyanese didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if there had been an attack. We didn't know what was going on. And everybody was paying rapt attention to any media outlet that could give the smallest snippet of information. Now the temperature's gone down, and Guyanese, they're going ready to go back to their lives. They're ready to go back to the us and them comfort zone that they know about. And I worry about that too, because it's that same complacency that allows us to be unprepared for events when they come up.
I agree.
It's that same complacency that allows us to let things go, let things slip, and then when there's a crisis, you have so few resources that you don't know what to do with yourself. And this is why I'm worried about us just allowing this now to pretend that it doesn't exist, that it disappears. I don't believe that we are assessing the Venezuela position from the Venezuela point of view. And I think that we need to do that because we need some kind of insight as to how the leaders are thinking, what's motivating the leaders in Venezuela, so that we can plan a course of action. Maduro, and I spoke to some people who knew, so who are in the know, who have lived in Venezuela, have had high office in Venezuela, because I'm no expert. So I had to, what you do is you go and you ask to find out. There's a strong sense that Maduro doesn't act on his own. He is just the civilian face, and that a great deal of power in Venezuela resides in their military, in their army, and in their navy. And that, in fact, he answers to and holds power because the army and the navy have not challenged him. Now, given the fact that he is so unpopular as a leader, I thought that was a credible point of view that was expressed to me. And the point was made, and this was made by people who have seen military involvement in smuggling and that kind of thing on the border, that if the Venezuelan military, if their army has an interest in Essequibo, in the Cayuni River, in access to that, and we know that there are Venezuelan gangs there, we know that there's a mafioso kind of culture there, we know that they've been selling illegal fuel there, we know that minerals, valuable minerals, have been coming back and forth, we know that it is a place of crime. If it is profitable,
but also a lot of wealth, right?
If it is profitable, and profitable for army folk in Venezuela, that is something we have to think about, and we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we monitor this? How do we police it? And how do we make it less profitable? Make it less attractive as a prize? The same thing for the Navy. We know that that Venezuela and its Navy has been advocating for this, is looking for a sea lane, is looking for a route out. And then the Essequibo coast becomes more attractive. How do we put our foot down? How do we get the international community to put a stamp of authority to show this is not going to happen? If Maduro is just a face, are we paying too much attention to him and his vitriol and his noise, rather than to the real machinery in the background that is making this thing happen? Maduro landed at Venezuela after his meeting in St. Vincent, and at the airport, coming off the plane, he announced to the Venezuelans a great victory. The propaganda has started already, and we need to assess what has been done, anticipate where the other side is going to go and what their motivations are. and we need not to be complacent.
All right. First of all, Tim, that is such an interesting take on the matter, because with that concept in mind, the first thing I think we have to understand is that, and I think all Guyanese need to first and foremost understand is this situation is far from over, no matter what. Okay, this is not the end, and the reason that I think it's important to say that out bluntly like it is, and I hope the president holds a press conference and says this clearly, is because the last thing we need is for everyone to become complacent, as you have mentioned. Everybody is now calmed down and figured, oh my gosh, this is a success, there's going to be peace no matter what. But the truth is, I want to come at this from my own two perspectives, is first and foremost, I think as a citizen, as somebody that is, is in the political domain, has been following, Maduro's campaign and on this Venezuela matter, has been following the ICJ very closely, has been following the whole scenario, even down to presence on the military border, Brazil's reaction, etc., is that I think if there's one thing that we have to accept is that Maduro's word holds very little value. All right? Even if I think, again, we trust the people of Venezuela's opinion, if a man can be dishonest with his own people, I'm sorry, as again, a very, layman point of view has to be that I can't trust every word that he has spoken, or even for that matter, has put into a treaty. Now, that is my first perspective. My second perspective is, if I, again, assess everything that Maduro has done up to this point, and now analyze from a Venezuelan's perspective, if I was to put myself in Maduro's shoes and had these same conversations, one of the things that I would always have to keep in the back of my mind, which is something that, you proposed a few minutes ago, is Maduro's view on this matter differs very much from the rest of us in the context of every time you read disputed area or whether or not they have to consult about the Essequibo region, etc., Maduro has already made it clear, and his government and the entire Venezuelan government for that matter, including parliament, including the main opposition in Venezuela, has made it clear that Venezuela is not an area of contention. Essequibo belongs to Venezuela. So if the entire government of Venezuela has already asserted that Essequibo belongs to Venezuela, to the point where they have put out an official map within their country that states this is now officially territory of Venezuela, including the entire Essequibo region, then every time I read a conversation of we are going to resolve the area, we're going to resolve all issues of peace, but they ain't got nothing to, if I look at it from a Venezuelan perspective, I ain't got nothing to resolve. That area Essequibo belongs to Venezuela, there's nothing to resolve. So yes, I will be very peaceful. But if you decide to be contentious in my area of land, well, now we're having a different conversation. And that is my worry with this scenario.
Well, I don't think we can take away from the government the one accomplishment that they made at this meeting, and that is that there was an unequivocal declaration for peace, for peaceful resolution of everything. So that has to be our takeaway. And to me,
Agreed.
that is what has calmed everything down on both sides. Well, on our side, certainly.
Yeah.
And we have to hang on to that, come hell or high water. That's what we got to hang on to. So to me, that's the starting point. The inescapable fact is that Essequibo is governed with Guyana dollars, is English speaking. You go to Perica and you cross over and you drive up, you go to Supanam and you drive up to Charity. Miners go and fly in, we have daily flights going all over. The operation of Essequibo as an economic unit, as a social unit, is Guyanese. That's unequivocal, there's no doubt about that.
I think internationally recognized as well.
So although I'm afraid we are going to hear propaganda from the Venezuelans, we keep doing what we do. So land titles are held under our system of law. The currency used is the Guyana dollar. There is no doubt what's going on in Venezuela, and I think it will stay that way. So the temperature has gone down, but the question we have to ask now is, what steps should be taken to consolidate and build on what exists there. And I am very afraid, given what we've seen in the last 30 years of Guyana's history, that if this thing just fades away and Maduro goes and we return to quietude, that again, that will lead to complacency and
back to square one in a couple of years from now.
Increasingly incompetent leadership, we'll be back to square one.
Okay. Now, absolutely. I think the most critical aspect of this is figuring out what the next step, what the next step is. And I think this is what leadership has to be. Not, we have overcome a hurdle now, and don't worry, guys, no matter what happens, everything will be good. Because that's not the case. It has never been the case on this matter that's, again, has been going on for as long as any of us can remember. As long as the history of Guyana has existed. Now, let me ask a very straightforward question, and I'd like your direct opinion on this. If Guyana signs a treaty of defense with America or Brazil, our economic trade partners, or beefs up our military for that matter, or even our military presence, when I say military presence, let's say border control on that side, will that be viewed as acts of aggression?
I don't think it would be a good idea to do anything like that will be seen or using propaganda can be sold to anyone else as an escalation by us. It would be foolhardy.
Okay.
What I would like to say is there are other ways to increase a presence. Brazil, for the longest while, has wanted access to the Caribbean Sea. Guyana is such a funny place. We had progressed so much up to the 60s. We were one of the more developed of the colonies in the Caribbean. And then we regressed. We went from the Iron Age to the Bronze Age back to the Stone Age under a sequence of poor leaders. So Barnum took us back. There was a slight renaissance under Hoyt, but the progress has been so slow that we've really regressed. And what we see happening now is an attempt to kind of prop back up infrastructure that has become more and more dilapidated. So there's an attempt to rebuild the road, to tar part of the road, go into Rupununi and that kind of thing. And the idea behind that is an access way for Brazil to come to Georgetown. Now, I don't know why we are focused on Georgetown as the only location to access the sea. Years ago, in the 60s, there was a cattle trail that went up the Berbice River to Berbice from the Rupununi.
Right.
The Pomeroon River is a deep river, and there's a lot of trade there, and the Essequibo region produces huge amounts of agricultural produce, and there is a growing trade out of the Pomeroon, informal, yes, but sending provisions and that kind of thing to Trinidad. I don't see why we can't formalize that kind of initiative and that kind of development that is now taking place beneath the radar and encourage greater activity from Brazil and allow them greater accessibility to places in Essequibo other than Georgetown.
Right.
So develop a harbor there, make it a port of entry, allow goods to be exported out of the Pomeroon. You remove the bottleneck that already is in Georgetown. You remove the congestion that already exists because gas and oil is there, shore base is there. It's ridiculous. They're trying to move some things over to Breed and Hoop. That's a good initiative. It won't be enough. It will still be congested. You have a serious issue getting goods across the Essequibo River from Essequibo coming down here, so that anything grown in Essequibo that is being exported has to come across the Parika, drive down, cross the harbor bridge, reach to a wharf in Georgetown. We've been doing that for 50 years. What's the matter with us? If you talk about complacency and you talk about lack of imagination, lack of initiative, poor leadership in terms of just pure economic planning, we're the center of the earth. So we need to find some initiative, some good new ideas that expands our use, both economically and socially, of the Essequibo region. And I think Brazil is a good way to do it.
Okay. So we get into the conversation of deep water harbor and that kind of thing.
That's just one example.
Giving them a route of economic trade through Guyana. And we're on the topic of Venezuela, and thus having their investment here a bit more heavy, a bit more essential to Brazil, and thus hopefully something that they are willing to protect.
Well, I don't think that we need to look at it in terms of protection or military or trying to find a big brother to bolster us up in case of danger. Part of leadership is economic progress, is economic development. And to use your example, the Pomeroon, Charity. The Pomeroon used to be a place where you had coconut plantations, where you had coffee plantations, where you had a lot of agriculture, and it has gone downhill. So that can so easily be reversed, and it can become a center, a thriving hub, and a place for export, so that people in Essequibo don't have to deal with the travails of a crossing to Perica, a crossing of the Demerara River just to export products. If we had another port of entry, we could become much more attractive, and I think that is a location that it can happen. But there needs to be initiatives supported by our leadership with vision to improve the economic situation in Essequibo and make money spin faster and better than it's doing now.
I like it. So the idea now, in your opinion, at least again with the Venezuela controversy in the back of our head, the correct route of leadership at this point in time is heavy investment in Essequibo.
And people
get Essequibo rolling.
And people want to invest.
I like
you just have to let it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There are people there, but again, nothing can happen without the government support and essential initiatives. Because one, the largest investment will come from their side, but then two, also formalizations, licenses, blah blah blah, right across the board. Any kind of system being set up has to come through the government, right? So when you say that, just open and let people come and do it, the truth is that unless they're throwing their backing behind it, it becomes very difficult.
Well, I'll give you one example. State leases. Our government has been miserly to the point of stinginess in, to me, what is the one resource that should be dealt with generously and given out to Guyanese, which is land. Leases are given of state land to plant rice, to do any other kind of agriculture. And that's been the position for 40 to 50 years.
Right.
And what that does is it perpetuates state control of what to me should be our central and increasingly thriving means of revenue in this country. Twisted or alternate oil is temporary. Mining is increasing and mining needs to be developed. But agriculture should be a staple going forward, as it has always been a staple. It shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah.
And the fact is, if you look at our figures of
agriculture is on the decline. There's no question.
So we are already on the cusp
Yeah.
of the oil curse, of the resource curse.
Yes, yes.
And that needs to be reversed. Mm-hmm. If you give farmers the land that they are occupying, you make it available to them to be owned.
Yeah.
You immediately give them an equity, you give them value.
Correct.
You give them something, they can go to the bank, they can borrow money, they can
even more so, it's generational, has a future. They can pass to their children. Absolutely.
And farming therefore will become a business rather than a scattershot attempt that it is now.
Yeah.
If you look at how farms are run in Europe, in Ukraine, in the States, they are businesses that are organized, structured, and they have evolved from people who have an interest in the land and have been able to use that land as security to borrow money to make the investment.
Okay.
Here it's difficult because you got to keep going back to the state because all you have is a lease. And if they don't like you, you find somebody else who owns your land. The tenuous nature of the ownership is problematic, and the real equity that you have is not something that you can find an investor willing to come with you to invest. Yeah. That's problematic. So that's a small area that can be changed. And by giving the folk who are there a real interest in the land that they are on, you suddenly change all the rules and you are encouraging investment. Government needs to get out of business and get out of trying to be a landlord or a partner in a business or in a commercial venture.
Get out of private business altogether. Yeah.
Yes. That is not the function of government. And as long as they keep trying to monopolize that so that they can control the purse strings and control the donations for political causes and control as they like to control. As long as they keep trying to do that, we'll find ourselves where we are now.
Back to square one, especially doubling back to this Venezuela situation.
Yep.
Unless things change, it's going to happen again. We don't even know what's going to happen now within the very near future. But what we do know is what we have been doing is not working. And this is something I try to get through to everyone that I speak to. I cannot explain any more to the public is that what we are doing is not working. Because if this Venezuela situation should have done anything to the public, it's showing you how vulnerable we are. How much lack of systems and protocols, how much there is nothing behind the curtain that you have to start realizing. This is all fragile and fickle. And one threat, and let's be very straight up about what has occurred here by itself even. This situation by itself, right as we speak, this Venezuela situation has turned off so much investment into this country already. For this thing to be all over the media, all over the world. Let's use yourself as an example. Would you go and invest in Ukraine right now? Would you go and invest in the Gaza Strip or Israel for that matter right now? No. Because the truth is, once we have this instability, people and legitimate companies are going to turn away.
So going back to what we said, we have to give the government credit because by agreeing to this initiative by Gonzalez, they have immediately dropped the temperature and things have calmed down, and investors will feel more confident and there will be greater confidence in the economy and things will get going again.
Right.
That credit must go to the government, and it was a good, wise decision by our president to go up to St. Vincent and have that discussion. I regret the Clause 9 clause. It's too late to cry over spilled milk. They've got to make the best that they can do with it and try to anticipate and avoid the adverse propaganda that's going to come out of Venezuela as a result of it. But going forward, we cannot be complacent anymore. We have to find ways to, with innovation, expand the role in the Essequibo, expand the economy, provide a secure system so that investors can confidently invest knowing that the playing field is level, that the rules are fair, and that they'll get a fair shake.
Good. All right. We are going to switch gears here quickly. We don't have a long show, but we have to discuss some matters that are a little closer to home rather than, international, our international issues. And that is the current economic situation in and around the country for everyone. I think we've found ourselves in a little bit of a more than a pickle here when it comes to cost of living and salaries in this country to ensure that every citizen has an equal opportunity to live a comfortable and stable and happy life with them and their families. As we all know, a nation can only be judged by its comfort of its weakest. All right? And we speak about benefits for, the elderly or the disabled, the children, single mothers, single parents. And we have to start discussing whether or not these people are being looked after. I think a good starting point with that is to assess how the government is treating its able-bodied people. And if we can come to a determination as to whether or not that grouping of skilled and able labor and the professional group and those that are working towards, our absolute, our industries of necessity, for example, teachers and doctors and nurses and police, I think how those people are treated will paint a very interesting picture when it comes to everyone else. And I think we need to discuss this 6.5% salary increase that the government had announced and then subsequently yesterday defended. Now, I'd like to start off by pointing out that I think across the board, and it's important for Guyanese to understand this. You know why we can't get statistics and such things out of the government? You know why we cannot figure out? You know how the government, you know how the American government, or any country for that matter, can state very clearly how much cost of living has rose in the last year, in the last 6 months? It's constantly being analyzed. The data is constantly being looked at. Now, we sit here and we watch the government give a 6.5% raise and then potentially use the fact that they have determined that the cost of living has not gone up by that much. And everybody just kind of sits there twiddling their thumbs and saying, man, but it feel like though. It feel like more than that, man. I mean, if I look at the cost of a pound of, a gallon of oil or a pound of beef, or an eggplant or pumpkin or whatever you want to call it, you sit down there and you go, man, but this thing is more than I paid for it last month. This thing is more than I paid for it last year. Now, you can't expect everybody to be, an actuary, right? But my question to this is, we've now come across, we've now crossed a threshold in this country in which our GDP has gone through the roof. And we know large in part that we blame the oil industry for that. GDP, that's a good thing, right? The amount of money that's being earned by the country has tremendously risen. It looks fantastic on paper. We get amazingly detailed percentages on that.
Well, that's easy to measure.
But not any particular detail on our cost of living, our inflation, our expenditure for that matter. Now, I'd like you to try and give me as much information as you can on your position on this 6.5% to public workers, just to completely, paint the entire picture. It was less than last year's raise. And to couple that, there are organizations like the Chronicle, for example, that are semi-autonomous, that the government, has decided are independent enough, that are not even being given the raise. There's bonuses to companies like GPL, whether it be Christmas or that sort of thing, that have been all canceled altogether. And again, every time that the government has been pulling back, all of these state agencies have been seeing, we don't have enough funds. I mean, you're getting the government propaganda on one side stating we're earning billions of dollars on oil, and then GPL and the Chronicle get a memo to all their employees stating, sorry, we don't have enough money to give y'all anymore. Now, I also would like to mention the political side of this. I'm going to let you do your analysis. I know it's a lot of information. I'd also like you to keep in mind that there has to be and there must be political motive behind this, in my opinion. Because as we all can know, if you want a statistic, the public sector of this country has never been large supporters of the PPP government. All right, historically. If you look at the statistics, you know where that clump of voting go. You know where majority of votes in the public sector go. And that is to the PNC, APNU, AFC organization. Now, obviously the murmurs have been, the government don't care about public sector because it doesn't have votes that they get in anyway. And I think that these are everything that needs to be analyzed when determining whether or not this is sufficient. So please, go ahead.
All right. I think we need to take a step back and we need to look at the real lives of real people. You see, I can only imagine, because when these shows are over, sometimes I go back and I look at the comments and I see the comments divided strictly along ethnic lines. And I can already see that half of the country will be saying, the public service don't do any real work anyway, they're on a permanent go slow, and that kind of thing, justifying what is an unjustifiable decision of 6.5% in our economy and given our existing inflation. But I want also to take us back 5 years ago, where another government closed down Gaisuko, whose employees are PPP supporters. And that was an equally, if not more,
impactful,
callous and impactful decision, where people found themselves on the breadline. People found themselves trying to plant a little garden in the backyard just to, feed the family, just to put something on the table. That was equally, if not more, harmful. And again, half the country said, everybody knows Gaisuko is not profitable, we can't maintain it forever.
Right.
But the other half, supporting blindly, said, how can you do this? How can you destroy such a large workforce? And it's time for us to step back and try to remember we are human beings. We must have some kind of empathy. We got to look at that old lady in Border Market who goes with $700 to buy meat, and she doesn't ask for 2 pounds or 3 pounds or 5 pounds or half a pound, because no matter how much the cost of the meat is, if she needs the meat, she's got $700. So the $700 that she took last month might have gotten more. This month, she's not spending more because $700 is what she has. But what's happening is that she's getting less for her $700. And we can sit down and throw comments across party lines. Half the country saying public servants don't do anything, the other half saying public servants aren't yours. Half the country saying Gaisuko is bankrupt anyway and costing the country, and the other half saying you're all in concern about Gaisuko people. We can do that. Or we can understand that this isn't a game. This is real life. This is people who have nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And we can try to pretend that some half-baked, half-assed, poorly implemented plan to give a cash handout to a poorly defined, poorly identified, impossible to identify group of people. Fishermen, I think, was one. Farmers was another. If we don't see the flaws in the system, and if we don't see the real poverty that is around us, then we've lost touch with our humanity. And if we are willing to sacrifice our humanity on the altar of ethnic loyalty, then we've got bigger problems than Venezuela. We've got much bigger problems. This is the truth. The truth is that in the public service, there are people who are taking home 100,000 and less than 100,000 a month. Now, this is also the truth that a Prado costs 45,000 US, and if you bring one in, the duty you have to pay on that thing, if you are honest, and in Guyana nobody's honest, is more than twice the value of the Prado. So you're paying another $100,000. When you see that government vehicle passing, driven by the chauffeur of someone who is one of the few and favored, that vehicle is more than 10 years' salary for the public servant at the bottom. And that public servant at the bottom is the one who has to go into Border Market with the same amount of money and accept that he may be buying less food this week than he could have bought last week. And I want to hear your commentators on your show tell me that it doesn't matter because these people don't do any work anyway, or they're slow, or they're inefficient, or Gaisuko didn't make money anyway and we couldn't afford to keep bailing them out forever.
That's the conversation that they should just close down the police force and close down the hospitals.
If that is the point of view that is going to be perpetuated because of the political loyalty, because of the blind loyalty,
we've lost already.
We've lost already.
Yeah.
It's time for something to change.
Agreed. And I think this is what we've now found ourselves back in.
Let me just say, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
What really bothers me is that they got some accounting magicians who speak the party line. I've seen one person magically convert 6.5% to 15%.
Yeah, I saw it too.
And look at the nation in their face.
Yeah,
and say, you're really getting 15%.
15%. I saw it.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's despicable. It's despicable. And people will sit down there and those that are on the same party lines as him are going to spew that out like it's fact.
Now, there was another outreach saying that we have these grants ready for the elderly. Old people can come and collect their grants. And I can speak to Cultural Center. A crowd at Cultural Center waited hours. Old people needed the money, didn't want to go home because they might lose the opportunity. Old people, elderly people, frail people, grandmothers, grandfathers, your grandmothers and grandfathers. Many of them went home at the end of the day having gotten nothing. Now, that is how we treat our elderly. And half of the country is going to say, kudos to the government, handouts to the elderly. And the other half of the country is going to criticize. We got to start getting it right. We got to get in touch with our humanity because this is just happening too much.
Tim, it's going on to 4 years now in office. You still have people lining up for hours, elderly people, for 20,000 Guyana dollars. We all know $20,000 is worth nothing these days. Can't even carry you through a week. Now, you telling me the country with the largest GDP growth in the world, with 700,000 people as citizens here, that's the best they could do? That's what you telling me? This is ridiculous now. How do you justify this nonsense? People sitting there, all driving the same old crappy cars, the same ones who house falling apart. How do you, again, at what point in time are the Guyanese public going to realize that if they keep doing the same thing, they will end up with nothing? Look, talk to the farmers directly. If those farmers, let's just start thinking outside the box here, because just what you said, if those farmers were now to stand up here and say, I am not voting for the PPP anymore, I am not voting for the PNC anymore until they give us transports for our farmed land, for our farming land, you tell me the impact that will have on the economy all of a sudden. These people, the farmers are going to get 10 times richer. You could go to the bank, you could sell it, you could do anything you want, you have a tangible asset in your hand. The Essequibo Venezuela situation, as you pointed out just now, will be far more controllable because obviously, as you mentioned, investment, equity, etc. And now, actual economic impact will go through the roof. But these people are sitting here, these same farmers, and I can call you guys out, are sitting here defending the status quo like you have anything to show more than you had 4 years ago. 4 years ago, you tell me your farmland booming. You tell me you're growing crops coming through your ears, you're making millions of dollars, you're 10 times richer, because we all know that's not the case.
So we have to find solutions, and the first solution
is vote differently.
Has got to be to reinstill, because the truth is, we are a caring people. We really are. We have that capacity, but there is something that allows us to turn the blind eye to callous acts of neglect and callous acts of indifference because politics is involved. And that needs to stop.
Yeah.
We need to recognize the truth, see the truth, and we need to have the courage to stand up and stop it.
Absolutely. I think that on that note, we are coming to a close now, but I think the theme of our show today was, if you want something different, you have to do something different. All right. And this applies to the Venezuela situation that's far from over, and our economic situation that is getting harder, folks. All right. And you come to grips with that, you come to reality with that, and then you start to think of what better decisions need to be made. We're here. We do this show as much as we can because, we think things need to be looked at from different perspectives, and we hope everybody else can see a different side of things. By the time, at least, we've laid it out as much as we can for you here. Nonetheless, on that note, guys, I don't think we're going to have a show next Friday. It's Christmas. And, as I always like to say, there's a time for politics and there's a time for not. And I believe this time, after we've all been through such a emotional, tumultuous situation, as much as we might want to say it's not done yet, at least I think people should take that little bit of solace we have for now, spend the time with your families for Christmas. Hopefully, you can carry them out and buy them gifts and, have a wonderful, holiday time, because I know a lot of work is giving their time off now. So on that note, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. Have a wonderful, wonderful time with your families. Take some time to relax. All of these issues hopefully will not be with us next year, but if they are, I know Mr. Jonas and myself will be right back here on aPolitical, trying to solve them with you guys. So on that note, thanks for having us and have a good Christmas.
Same to you.
On that note, guys, thanks for coming and joining us. We are aPolitically Incorrect. My name is Kian Jabour. Have a great Christmas. Take care, everyone.